Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Kristy Belton. She is an author, artist, and rewilding guide. She is the author of the book Statelessness in the Caribbean, The Paradox of Belonging in a Post-National World. Ms. Professor Bolton, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree.
Oh, Alpha, I'm delighted to be here.
I will go directly to the topic. When you come to the Caribbean, can you tell us, what are you talking about? What is the zoopolitics of the Caribbean for the people who don't know?
So when it comes to the Caribbean, this is a little bit tricky. In terms of geography, there's one answer. In terms of politics, there's another answer. So geographically, the country I'm from, the Bahamas, is not technically part of the Caribbean, okay? However, when we're talking about the politics of the Caribbean, there's a lot of similarities, whether the island states within the Caribbean were colonized by the Spanish, the French, or the British. There's similarities in the way that politics is often carried out. I don't want to give an overarching stereotypical, this is Caribbean politics, but it's very similar oftentimes to Latin American politics. It's who you know that will help you get whatever it is you need at any particular moment. And each country, of course, is going to be different in terms of the civil rights and the political rights that it honors for people. But geographically, the Caribbean, you're looking at from Cuba, Haiti, and all those countries that go all the way down to Venezuela.
I see.
So the West Indies.
As you indicated in your book, you are focusing on the Caribbean, and you indicated you are from the Bahamas.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the country as the Bahamas, and tell us a little bit growing up in that country? What was the feeling? What do you look like growing up in the Bahamas?
So it was a lot of time spent outside. That might be more a generational thing, right? Your parents just want you outside, free play. Screens didn't exist like they did now. We were very much a people, and we still are people that are very intimate. We're warm, but you have to know us for us to be very warm to you. So something I would say about back home compared to some of the other Caribbean countries I've traveled to, even though tourism is the basis for so many of the countries in the Caribbean and the Bahamas tends to have a little bit more of a, we're engaged in tourism because we have to be. We don't necessarily always love it, right? Whereas the rest of the Caribbean that I've traveled to, there seems to be a bit more of a warmth to you from the get-go. We are very warm as a people, but it takes a little bit extra to get us there. And in terms of growing up, there was a freedom there that our children today, even in this country, the United States, do not have. There was much more ability to free roam, let's say. Yeah.
Bahamas, as you indicated, is a country, island. What was, in which city did you grow up? And can you tell us a little bit about your city?
So Nassau is the city, and everybody that knows anything about the Bahamas hears about Nassau. But Nassau is, like you said, Alpha, only the city. The island itself is New Providence. New Providence is pretty much one of the smallest islands in the entire chain. So our archipelago is really, really long. It's at the same latitude as West Palm Beach where it begins, and it pretty much goes all the way down to Cuba. But most of the population lives on this tiny little island because geographically, from the days of the pirates, it had a really great entryway for boats to come in and out. So over time, more and more people just built up that space of Nassau. And you go to Nassau if you want nightlife and culture and to learn about colonialism and history of slavery and all these sorts of things. But if you want to go somewhere that's more chill, where you can have your own beach, sing to the sand and the sea, then you go to one of our family islands.
I see. Bahamas, is it an independent country, or you are part of the Commonwealth?
It is an independent country since 1973, and thank you for asking that. A lot of people think we belong to the United States. We are independent, yes.
What does the population look like? Is it a diverse population? For instance, looking at you, it's very difficult to put you in a specific category. Are you white? Are you Indian? Are you black? What is your ancestry? And what is the component of the Bahamas population?
So we are a majority Black nation. Okay. And if you go back in time, a lot of our peoples who are Black ancestry, typically you will find out that their ancestors came from Nigeria, Ghana, and a lot of the West Coast, obviously from the days of slavery, right? In the Atlantic slavery, the triangle that existed. The people who are more pale complexion like myself, we tend to be mixed, right? So within me, I have Senegal, Mali, I have Ivory Coast, Ghana, but then I also have a slew of different European countries. So growing up, where we're different to the United States, we are racialized, but with regard to skin color more than anything. So what you will often encounter growing up is people will call you out skin color wise. So I would often be called yellow, right? So in terms of well, in the Chicago area, I don't get that much sun anymore, but it's this notion that we will even use the words like mango colored skin. And it's not a segregated country, but there is a lot of animosity going down the chain in terms of darker skinned people towards lighter skinned people and vice versa, right? So it's a lot of colorism. I shouldn't say racism. It's a lot of colorism that exists back home. But I've noticed, because we go back home twice a year with my children to visit our family that's there. My husband's also Bahamian. And the younger generation compared to me, I grew up in the 90s. There's a lot less colorism and a lot more acceptance of people for who and how they are. So it's like everywhere in the world, things take their time, right?
Yeah. So basically, the race relation, we can say in the Burma did improve to a extent that the young generation are more accepting.
I think so, yes.
Okay. As you indicated, you were born in Nassau?
No, I was not born in Nassau. And this is one of the problems that actually comes into the statelessness. Okay. So I was born in a colony in the Caribbean. So I'm legit born in the Caribbean. So we say the Bahamas is not technically Caribbean in terms of what we would geographically consider Caribbean. I was born in St. Kitts, which is an island way further south in the Caribbean. It's attached, you oftentimes hear about St. Kitts and Nevis, and people say, oh, Alexander Hamilton. They know about Hamilton, the Broadway, former U.S. Treasury Secretary. He was from Nevis. Well, I'm the island pretty much right next door to it.
This is a United States territory or is an independent country?
It's also independent, but when I was born, it was a colony. And this actually it doesn't make a difference in my own personal story, but the fact that my mother is a Bahamian, and her mother was a Bahamian, and her mother was a Bahamian, and father, blah, 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 all the way back. The fact that my mother had me outside of her country of citizenship, and she was married to a foreigner. So my daddy, from the age of 7, grew up in the Bahamas, but he's of English ancestry. He's born in the UK. My parents got together. They went overseas. They had me. The Bahamian Constitution says, no, 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 no. As our women, you are not allowed to be married to foreigners and pass on your citizenship equally to the men. Bahamian men do not have the same sort of limitation, right? So in terms of birth, this is why I bring this up now. It's like we are very unequal when it comes to the treatment of women compared to men within the Bahamian sphere, legally, politically, and in other ways.
So this book is quite very personal, hearing your story. Can can you tell us can you take us to that background? You may go through a situation of statelessness, and you may struggle in your own, but when it come to you, you decided you're going to write about it. So can you tell us how the idea emerged and how you were able to decide that you're going to write about this book? And what triggered you to write it,
In terms of a trigger, I knew nothing about statelessness until the early 2000s, Alpha. Most people knew nothing about statelessness, unless you were stateless, obviously, right? I was doing research. I had to come up with a thesis for my master's degree at the time. And I was really interested in refugees. And somehow, even back then, you follow one link online, and we're talking about 2001, 2002, and you follow a next one. And you kind of go down this rabbit hole, and I came across this word stateless. And I'm like, what is that, right? So basically what I'm trying to say is, if you've never heard of the term stateless, join the billions of other people on the planet that haven't, right? So when I started doing more research about it, it was simply becoming aware of the facts. So I was in international studies background, even at the master's level, and knowing that we're supposed to be a citizen of a state, and yet you're telling me there's millions of people that exist that aren't citizens of anywhere? That was just like a kind of a mind-blowing moment for me. How is this possible? And then when I started researching more into it, I became aware of all of the human rights violations that occur when you are stateless. And it was like, I had no idea at the time anything about my own country's citizenship laws and inequality in passing on citizenship. None of that. It was more about, this exists, it is not right, I want to bring awareness about it. Like, I've always been somebody who, if I know something and I can share it, I'm going to do it. So it was more a matter of triggered by the unjust nature of it. And then the more I did the work and the research and was on the ground with people who lived in these communities, it's personal in the sense of, I'm human, they're human. Right? This is before I even became aware that, hey, if my daddy hadn't been part of the colonizing empire, if he hadn't been able to give me citizenship, that I would have been stateless, right? That all of this was felt way before I even knew about how I strangely linked up to the issue of statelessness.
Yeah, because often people make assumption you were born somewhere, you will get the citizenship of that country, and it's quite natural. But when you go through the situation you went through, or millions of people are going through without finding themselves without a country they can call their own state. Let's go back to you. As you indicated, your mother was from the Bahamas, your father was not, and you were born outside the Bahamas. Right. Take us through the process. Were you able to claim your Bahamian national citizenship, or until now, this is your issue?
I was able to. So,
okay, if this is the case, can you take us to the process? To that journey. How challenging was it to get your citizenship, and what did you do? Perhaps people may be inspired to kind of use the same strategy to get their citizenship.
So in my case, Alpha, it was nothing compared to what other people face, right? So in my situation, after birth, they went through the process of getting me citizenship from the UK because they couldn't automatically get it for me from the Bahamas, right? Okay. I did not get Bahamian citizenship until I was, I think, 14 or 15 years old. And what my mom had to do was she had to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Bahamas with an entire application, proof that she's Bahamian, proof that her mother and father were Bahamian, all this sort of stuff. And I was able to get it citizenship through a process known as registration, right? So I'm a Bahamian via registration.
Okay.
If my mom or if I had waited until after the age of 18, it would have been a different process. Much harder to secure all the necessary documents and have them be processed in a timely manner. So for instance, let me pause here. There are a lot more stories in my book on statelessness in the Caribbean about people who waited years to get Bahamian citizenship, right? Even though they were born there, birth does not matter. Like something that maybe the viewers might want to know is, as Alpha had said earlier, we assume that people just get citizenship at birth, right? But each state determines how they're going to grant citizenship. Some countries don't allow automatic citizenship through birth on the soil. It doesn't matter. You have to get it through blood, through an ancestor, more than likely a parent. Yeah. In the Bahamian case, they don't allow for a birth on the soil to give you citizenship, right? Your parents are important here. And all this to say is, inside the book, there are stories of people who struggled to obtain their citizenship, even when they were going through the so-called proper procedure, right? I'm bringing in the documents you say that I need to bring. Bureaucrats, and this is one of the things that I want to highlight about statelessness. Actually, I want to be clear what a stateless person is, because we've been chatting about this. And I just want to be very, very clear. When you are stateless, there's no country in the world that recognizes you as its citizen, which means you are legally invisible, right? Before the eyes of the law, you don't exist. So everything that we think that's easy to do with an ID of some sort, something as simple as a library card, enrolling my child in school, opening a bank account, getting a job, anything where you are required to prove you are who you say you are, stateless people cannot do that, right? And so, go ahead, Alpha.
Yeah, we will definitively get inside the book and talk about all those subjects. I just want to take us in that process. Eventually, you left the Bahamas. You became a citizen of that country, and you came to the United States. When was it, and why you decided to come to America?
So the U.S. was what almost all Bahamian children think of as one of the places you go to for university, for college, right?
Okay.
And so it was literally, I wanted to come to school. And my mom said I couldn't go very far, so I had to stick to Florida because Florida is right next to the Bahamas. And so that's how my journey here started, was literally through tertiary, post-secondary school studies. Yeah.
How was life coming to America? Was it easy for you to integrate, or it was a little bit challenging?
It was shocking. Look, I had come over to the US every now and again to do shopping. So lots of Bahamians, we go to the States to buy goods because it's cheaper than back home. And honestly, I had never seen so many, being surrounded by a culture that was very different to mine. There was a lot more pale-skinned people and fewer dark-skinned people. Like, I grew up where my doctors, my teachers, my neighbors were generally dark-skinned, Black people, right? So that's what I'm accustomed to. I might be pale-skinned, but I'm, as my friends, and this kind of threw me for a loop when I was at university, Alpha. I would hang out with the Caribbean crew at university when we would eat at lunchtime and dinner. And so it was a bunch of Trinidadians, Haitians, people from Martinique and elsewhere. And they would call me an inside-out Oreo. And
what is that?
that means you are Black on the inside, white on the outside, right? You're inside-out Oreo.
Oh, okay. There is a similarity, because in Africa also, when you are into a lot of studies and nerd, they can say you are Black from the outside, but white in it. Like you know the author Frank Fano, the mask, black mask, you know.
Yes.
So that issue have been, yeah, go ahead with.
Oh yeah. And so in terms of having to get used to things that you look at me and you have assumptions about who I am and where I come from, right? And the US, like I said before, is very racialized.
Okay.
Your skin color comes with a particular label and particular assumptions, right? None of which applies to me. I'm not from here. Like even now, culturally, people will mention things from when they were growing up, and I'm like, didn't see the show, don't know what you're talking about. Like that's not part of who I am. But I've been here decades now. Like I studied politics. I know why these things exist. But in terms of what it was like for me initially, very, very weird. I have this, I'm gonna shut up, but this is my one joke. I had said to my friends from back home, when I first came to the States, if there had been an elevator with 2 white men in it and the next elevator with 2 black men in it, you best believe I was going in the elevator with the 2 black men, because I was not used to being surrounded by people of a pale complexion. It's not that I wasn't aware of my skin color, because back home, again, it's all about your skin color. Colorism exists. But it was more what you're acculturated to, what your norm is, what's your natural. And my natural is coming from a black majority population. Yeah.
As a Bahamian, are you required to have a visa to come to America or no?
So yes, however, you can get what's a police record to travel, but a police record, I've never traveled. So before I got US citizenship, I had never traveled on a police record, only visas. So I can't speak to it, but I do know that you can get to the US on a police record, but I think you have a very limited time you're allowed to be here. Maybe it's a week or specific date, right? Whereas a visa, you can get it for 6 months, a year. You know, there's a length of time where you have more freedom to go back and forth. So yes.
Eventually, you write the book. I'm going to repeat the title again: Statelessness in the Caribbean, the Paradox of Belonging in a Post-National World. Was it part of a piece that you need to, through school, you needed to write a doctorate to get a certificate, or you just decided this is a topic of interest and you wanted to write about it? Which one was it?
It was both. So when I told you in the early 2000s, I became aware of statelessness, I wrote my master's thesis on statelessness.
Okay.
Not to the degree that's present in the book at all. I was just learning about it. And even back then, Alpha, in the early 2000s, the organization known as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, it barely had anybody working on the issue. It just wasn't a huge priority, right? So I kept with that subject matter through my graduate studies. So after I got my master's, I went on to get my PhD. And always, almost no matter what the class was, I always tried to look at statelessness from the perspective of that class, right? So it wasn't always just about statelessness from a political lens. Sometimes if I took anthropology, philosophy, African history, right? I was always trying to understand statelessness from that perspective. But the book itself, it's my PhD dissertation that I modified somewhat and published as a book. Yes.
I see. I want to come to the title. Why you choose Statelessness in the Caribbean as a title, and the paradox of belonging in a post-national world? You may choose other titles, but you decide to choose one. And I will come back to when specifically, because I like details, when did you start writing the book, and when the book ended. After sharing the reason you choose the title, I would like you to take us to that process of writing the book.
So I did not choose this title. The title I wanted was Rooted Displacement.
Oh.
Right? And so one thing that happens when you write and you work with publishers, in my case, it's a university press, they're going to take the book through their different departments. And the marketing department's going to say, this title doesn't work. Here's what we think it should be. And so that's what happened with my book. So Rooted Displacement is what I wanted, and Statelessness in the Caribbean is what we got at the end of it. So that's not my doing, but it's a very clear title about what the work is about. But in a sense, I find it a limiting title because it's actually much more than only statelessness in the Caribbean. But I understand the need from the publishing and marketing perspective of that's not my area of expertise. So you go with what they suggest. Now, in terms of when I began writing it, gosh, I can't give an exact moment in terms of a year. So my first child was born in 2013. And I remember I was in the throes of writing it up. I had already done all the field work in the years prior. And I was pregnant with her actually on my last trip to the Dominican Republic. And it was hard. I am blessed enough to be married to somebody who actually had a job while I was in grad school, right? Not everybody is. Sometimes it's two students. And so what we ended up doing was my daughter would be upstairs, I'd be in the basement typing away while she had care. We paid for a caregiver for a few hours for her so that I could type.
Yeah. So let's go into the book. When you come to the book, what are the different chapters? Personally, I went through reading a little bit, and I see that you divided the book in 3 chapters. One of them, the first chapter, is reconsidering forced displacement. What is forced displacement?
So forced displacement is when typically the state, right, or we'll say country for our purposes here, but when a country or the authority figures in a country, because they don't like a particular group, oftentimes for religious, racial, or ethnic reasons, are going to begin persecuting that group somehow, giving them trouble. Yeah. So forced displacement is when you are pushing those people away from their homes. Okay, it could be within a state you're pushing that group, and that's known as internal displacement, or it could be you're pushing that group, forcibly displacing them across a border, and that's when we have our refugee situations, right? So forced displacement is making somebody feel unsafe where they are, in their home, in their skin, in their beliefs, and causing them through violent means, typically, to flee.
I see. But through your research in the Caribbean, did you have a specific example of category of people who was forced to leave a island or to feel like they don't belong? Or outside also, during your research, did you analyze a situation that really affected you and put you in the situation that you have to write about it?
So this is where statelessness is an anomaly. And this is why I like the title Rooted Displacement, because roots give you the idea that you're actually not moving. But displaced means you being moved, right? So there's a paradox here. So stateless people, for the most part, Alpha, are not forcibly displaced in the sense of they're made to flee across a border like refugees, and they're not even made to flee from a home within a country. They're actually people that, for all intents and purposes, almost seem like you and I would as citizens, right? Like, they look like they're just hanging out in this let's say, Canefield village or in a shanty town in the Northern Bahamas, right? Like they have a place to be. The government isn't necessarily always going to be persecuting the stateless, but there are multiple examples around the world even today where stateless people are displaced, but the majority of stateless people aren't displaced in the typical sense of movement. And one of the reasons why I wrote this book, Alpha, was because we always assume that forced displacement, we're talking about it here from a conceptual perspective. Forced displacement, if you have ever worked with people who are forcibly displaced, or you're well versed in the human rights literature, you know that forced displacement is an extremely hard situation for any human being to be in, right? You maybe have a bag on your back and you're forced to flee. The stateless, because they're not always the bearers of violence, it's not always overt violence, it's forcing them to flee. It makes people blind to their situation. But if you remember what I said earlier, that when you're stateless and no state recognizes you as a citizen, basically any and every human right that exists can be violated because you don't exist. Physically, you're there, we see you, but on paper, in law, you don't exist. So when you look at trafficked people today, when you look at people who become enslaved today, when you look at people who suffer any number of human rights violations, the stateless are often in high proportions among that group. So the point being here, you don't have to be made to flee a place to suffer the consequences of what we consider to be normal. And I don't like that term, but the understood concept of forced displacement. You can suffer forced displacement consequences while being in place, by being rooted, by being at home.
Statelessness. Through your study, how big is the number statistically? Because many of us, we cannot, when I see you, there is very difficult, it will be perhaps very difficult for me just to see a person and say they are stateless if the person doesn't tell me their situation. So you had somebody who wrote about it. Do you have any tips you can share to first recognize somebody who's in that situation? And also, what is the population that are in that situation? What is the number so we can know how big the issue is?
So this issue, it's really hard, Alpha, to say what the number is. So the United Nations has this database.
Okay.
And the database will say, just over 4 million people are stateless globally right now. The majority of them, Southeast Asia, Europe, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and scattered elsewhere on the globe, right? But we who work on statelessness, or I used to work on statelessness, know that that number is far, far higher. Because when you're invisible, it's not like the authorities are going to go around in their census collecting and be like, are you a citizen or are you stateless? Most of these countries don't have what are known as stateless status determination procedures. So to get to your question of how can we know that somebody is stateless or not, you won't know unless you ask them. And if you ask them, they're probably not going to say they're stateless, because if you're stateless, you're highly vulnerable and you don't want to be put in that situation, right? And so it's the suggestion that there's at least 10 million people who are stateless globally, that still stands, excuse me. There are at least, there's way more than two, but two that I'm going to put out here for the viewers and for you. So the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion, which is a Netherlands, London-based organization, and then the Global Movement Against Statelessness, which is actually composed of people who are stateless from all of these different countries, those two organizations have a lot of information that's more contemporary in terms of how can you help us? If we come out and say we're stateless, how can you help us? But I just want to reiterate, it's such a vulnerable position to be in, especially if you are in a country that doesn't have a very secure human rights framework. The likelihood of you wanting to be exposed is zero because you don't have a country to go back to when you're stateless, okay? And so if you end up being detained by the authorities for whatever reason, you can be detained indefinitely, right? Because you're not a migrant, you're not coming from somewhere else. So where can you be sent back to? It's a very, it's difficult the term situation. I use. It is, yes.
Yeah. In your part 2, you talk about democracies as engines of forced displacement. There is a kind of a contradiction when you democracy, you think about a system that provide, that protect human rights, allow people to be sovereign, but you are seeing it as an engine. Is the trigger of forced displacement? Why you come to that conclusion?
So it's not that I believe that they are the trigger or the cause necessarily. Not every single democracy on the planet is going to treat its non-citizens or its citizens in the same way, right? There's degrees, gradations of what it means to be a democracy, obviously, right? You look at the United States today, and I can't remember the organization that came out. Like, the United States has officially fallen from its democracy label to electoral autocracy, right? So what it means to be a democracy is fluid. It just, at the end of the day, should be something along the lines of the people, whoever the people are, have a right to have a say in the politics, the policies that affect them. But the problem comes in when you determine who the people are. So you had mentioned, well, democracies are supposed to be the ones that are, at least out of all the forms of government, who are best at protecting human rights. So yes, this is an important point, Alpha. To be stateless, let's say in France, is going to be a very different situation to being stateless in Myanmar or Burma, whatever term you want to use, okay? Right? Not that Myanmar is a democracy, so that was a poor example, but point being, who belongs and who's given human rights differs amongst democracies. Now, the two I chose, right, in terms of engines of forced displacement, as you mentioned, the point of this is to show those two chapters specifically that you can have what appear to be democracies on paper, meaning in laws, in policies and rules, but at the end of the day, when you're on the ground and actually looking at people's lives, so-called democracies are not as perfect or upstanding as we think. And what I was trying to do with those two chapters is challenge the claim that some scholars make that you don't need to be a citizen anymore. Personhood, just being human, is enough to access human rights in our modern world. And I'm saying, no, that's not true. Even in democratic regimes, our laws can appear neutral. Our constitutions can appear neutral, but they can have effects on certain groups of people on the ground in actuality, right? And that's what we discover in the Bahamian and Dominican cases. People of Haitian descent are the ones who are disproportionately affected by statelessness in those countries. But when you look at the laws of these countries, well, for the most part, they seem like they would affect Alpha the same way, or somebody else the same way. But no, what we believe when it comes to democracies needs to be challenged. Statelessness can be caused by so-called democratic regimes.
I see. No, I totally agree with your view, considering often countries prioritize their citizens. And if you are not a citizen of a specific country, I think you will not be able to have the same rights, than the citizens who live in that country. In that chapter, you took the example of Bahamas and Dominican Republic, and you mentioned neither fish nor falls. What that mean in the context of Bahamas?
So when it comes to the Bahamas, you have children who are born to Haitian migrants. Okay. Those children know no other country other than the one they're born into. In this case, the Bahamas again. They grow up and they know that they don't belong to the Bahamas because they're not citizens. The Bahamas, again, it's not a country you can just be born on the soil and get citizenship automatically. So they know they're born here. They go spend their entire childhood and teenage years in that country, but they don't belong formally. And they don't belong socially either. Anti-Haitianism is a big thing, not just in the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, and a lot of other countries, right? Being against, there's a stigma against Haitians. And that's historical, right? You got the first Black nation in the Caribbean rising up. You got to keep them down somehow, right? So there's a stigma that's always associated with them. And it's got a long-standing history, right? But in the Bahamian case, you're neither fish nor fowl, because you're not fish in the sense of you're not Bahamian, but you're not fowl in the sense of, let's say, Haiti, because Haiti doesn't necessarily recognize you as a citizen in reality. On paper, Haiti might. But if your parents were migrants and they don't have anything to prove that they are Haitian, you cannot get Haitian citizenship very easily at all. Notwithstanding what politicians may say. The people I interview and other people have interviewed, you can't just walk into the Haitian embassy and speak Creole and they'd be like, yeah, you're Haitian. Here, have a passport. We recognize you as a Haitian citizen. You're not stateless anymore. It doesn't work like that. So neither fish nor fowl means you don't belong in the country you were born into, and yet the country that your parents supposedly belong to doesn't necessarily recognize you in all instances either. So you're neither one or the other.
I think we can make, based on facts and the news, we can make the same remark when you come to the Dominican Republic. The Haitians have a lot of problems and often are treated differently. Based on your studies, why? Is it a race issue? Is it cultural issue? Or there is a background to it that we don't know?
I'd say there's a lot of things that come into this one, Alpha. So you have two pieces of a shared island, Hispaniola. One was colonized by the French, one was colonized by the Spanish, right? So there was different ways of ruling from the get-go. One was a lot more lenient in terms of the mixing of peoples than the other. The Dominican Republic was even under the authority, let's say. The Haitians came in and governed the Dominican Republic for a little while. I can't remember the exact number of years. I think it was about between 17 and 20 some years, right? So there's this historical, okay, you're not the same as us. You're culturally like Creole, French mix, French-African mixture. We, however, we are Indian and Spanish mixture, which is entirely untrue. They also are African ancestry, right? But culturally, there's that. There's the Haitians came in and governed us without our consent for a period of time in recent history. But there's also this notion of racism that I'm gonna call it out, that is really, really what's at the root of it, Alpha. I can't speak to whether this is still true, but when I was doing my research, for the longest time, the national identity card in the Dominican Republic, and we'd have to see if it's still the same, would only allow its citizens or its residents to mark whether they were basically white or Indio. They wouldn't recognize the fact that a lot of the people that are supposedly Indio looking are mixed people, right? Mixed European African ancestry. And they didn't have at the time supposedly Black. Now, I can't speak again whether this is still true, but racism and a lot of the people that I interviewed spoke to the fact that at the end of the day, racism counts for a lot in the Dominican case.
I see. In the third part of your book, talk about no citizenship insiders and the right to belong. In that part, what did you want to talk about? No citizenship insiders and the right to belong. What are you advocating?
So oftentimes when we think about people who aren't citizens, in the literature, in the scholarly literature, they're often called non-citizens. And non-citizens are oftentimes people who, hey, you don't have papers, or you're a short-term migrant, or you're here as a tourist, whatever it may be. Everybody gets lumped into non-citizenship in that regard. My point was, there are people who are non-citizens who belong. They are insiders, right? You look at the case studies that I emphasize in my book, those children, whether it's the Bahamian case or the Dominican case, culturally speaking, they know of no other place other than the one they were born in and live in, right? They are insiders in that regard. However, do they suffer discrimination? Oh, yes. School, teachers, all of that, right? So they know they don't fully belong. But my point from a justice perspective is to emphasize, I don't care what the state says. These people belong. And so in that latter part of the book, and I don't want to get too much into the philosophy behind global justice and global distributive justice, but think of it as global justice tends to focus on what is fair at the global level. And the distributive part is what is fair in terms of goods, who gets what justly at the global level. We don't think about citizenship issues necessarily as an issue of global justice. We often have the assumption, right, that you're born somewhere, of course you're a citizen of that place. And then you become aware, oh no, there's millions who aren't. So what I argue at the end of the book, and it goes against the grain of how we are brought up these days, we are brought up to believe that state borders and states as they exist are the way to go in life. And this is an entity, the state, has only existed for a few hundred years. The passport as permission to cross a border is only just over 100 years old, right? All of these things, these constructs are made by humans who had power, who wanted to keep power, who wanted to have even more power, right? So they colonized, as we know, and they went around the world and forced certain ways of governance upon others. And so I don't like the understanding that the way things are the way things should be. So I'm always thinking about how else can something be? So with this last part of the book, I'm arguing for a right to belong. But my right to belong for people who are stateless isn't necessarily about, it doesn't matter what state you have citizenship of. So for instance, Bahamian children, not Bahamian children, children born in the Bahamas of Haitian descent, children born in the Dominican Republic of Dominican descent, Haitian descent, as long as they have citizenship from Haiti, that's all that matters. They're now a citizen of somewhere. No, that's not how it should be. We as human beings should be given agency as well. It shouldn't just always be the state, right, that gets to determine who belongs and why. Like, question, why is that okay? Why is it okay that you, wherever you're from, Alpha, me, wherever I'm from, that we happen to be lucky enough to fall within a state's laws and get citizenship, right? You and I do nothing when we're in our mother's belly, in our mother's womb, to get citizenship from any particular place, right? It's all by chance. And I'm arguing that the stateless should have the right to choose what country they belong to. Now, there's some caveats, right? I think residence is really important here. To just say you're born in a place and then you're out of it I think residence is really important to show belonging. But on the other hand, I don't think people should have a citizenship forced on them. If you don't want to have a citizenship of a place, you shouldn't have to either. It's all about making it more, giving us as humans more agency in the social contract. Supposedly, we have states to protect us against others. Why can't we start looking at the state system differently? Why can't we start thinking through what it means to exist in a world of inequalities that are just getting worse and figure out a way for people to belong that is just to them and also the communities they live in? I'm not saying, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's it in a nutshell, right? This right to belong.
Right to belong. In your chapter 6, part 3, you indicated sharing the world with others, a right to belong. Basically, hearing the history and the narrative behind the book, if I really understand you, you are saying we should see the human, not not a person belonging to a specific country.
Exactly.
Your view is that sharing the world with others and the right to belong. Why? What are the step? Because people may say you are a dreamer, because the reality doesn't fit your views. However, based on somebody who spent a lot of time doing research, writing, going to countries like Dominican Republic, the Bahamas, taking case studies, what are the steps you think we should take to come to that level, allowing people, fighting against statelessness, allowing people, for instance, Haitian children who were born in the Bahamas, who only know Bahamas as a country, to become a citizen of Bahamas? What we need to do to come to that level?
Alpha, that question is huge. It's multi-layered, right? We can answer it from a very technocratic, bureaucratic perspective. We can say, okay, we are going to have a clear set of rules, online, accessible anywhere, offline, that's transparent, which neither the Bahamian nor the Dominican governments have, or other countries around the world, right? It's oftentimes very unclear what's needed from just a simple paperwork perspective. But the paperwork perspective, I think we humans are super smart. We can figure that out. We can say clearly, this document's needed, and honor that, so that when people come in to apply for citizenship, you're not then sending them away for extra documents that didn't exist in the application process, right? That kind of stuff, that's the easy stuff in a sense, right? Being transparent in how you treat people. What I think is in terms of a step that's needed is one that is so much bigger than the paperwork side of it, although that is very important. Without those documents, you can't prove who you are, obviously. I think it actually takes, and this is going to take generations. It's going to take us rethinking who the other is and why the other is labeled as such, right? So this is as basic as, what is it about citizenship in this current state system that is so integral to being human? Okay, that's one aspect of it. The other one is it fair that a child born, let's say, in Syria has very limited opportunities in life because he or she is born in present day Syria, yet a child born in Norway, let's say, has all these opportunities and rights that that child over there in Syria doesn't have. We may say, oh, well, shame, it's a poor thing. It's just the luck of the draw. But it doesn't have to be the luck of the draw, right? If we want to think big in the future, and our world population is getting bigger and bigger, we are spreading as a species, no doubt, right? And if we say, whether or not you believe in climate change, there are a myriad ecological issues going on the planet that are forcing people, even citizens, to leave coastal communities and go inland, right? This is happening all over where countries have coasts. The citizens in that place are having to move somewhere else because they're being displaced by weather events, whether it's hurricanes or something else, right? The fact is, we have to start talking about the movement of peoples in a way, and I know this is coming back to belonging in a second, Alpha. It's not changing. It's going to get bigger, this issue of more people on the move. And to say that we are just going to keep holding on to these borders that were erected in the 17th to early 20th century as a way of managing people on the planet, it's futile. All it's going to do is create more and more strife, warfare, the killing of people because they're just trying to get somewhere else for a better life. So this right to belong, I only touch upon it in that last chapter, and I refer to it as, and I'm looking at it from the angle of statelessness, but the point is, in terms of a step, we really, really need to be critically feeling into, not just thinking into, what does it mean to be human on a planet that is full? What does it mean to be human on a planet where these catastrophic events, where food is now in short supply somewhere and it shouldn't be? What does it mean to be human when all of this is going on? How do we think about this? And so in terms of a step, we need to have conversations about what this looks like. I am no expert on these things, right? But I know what it means to care about something, and like you do, and bring awareness about it, right? And that's a step that's needed more than anything. How often is human rights actually taught inside schools? How much do we discuss what belonging actually feels like? Like we tend to end up on the more paperwork, bureaucratic side. But yeah, you know what, Alpha? These children of migrants could get citizenship from the Bahamas and the Dominican Republic, yet maybe they still won't feel like they belong because of their experience, right? So belonging is much more than citizenship. So when I say a right to belong at the end, I'm actually going beyond the legal status of citizenship here. And that deals with so much by way of socioeconomic issues as well, right? It's big. I think it's too big for us to even hold, or my brain to like. It was a beautiful question.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting and a challenging topic. You kind of decided to dive into because often when we talk about immigration, we think about Africans wanted to go to Europe. And they are denied. And here also we have the issue of immigration in the United States that is in the news everywhere. And we see it sometimes in the length of race, Black minorities over. And the case you brought up is here, even people from the same race, people we have impression they are all the same in Dominican Republic or in South Africa. There are a lot of xenophobia also going on, where the people don't want people coming from other part of Africa and things. So it's a very challenging situation. But you have to have the will of dreaming the world can get better. But the situation is, we have tendency, we think that the more educated we are, the more technological inclined we are, the better thing can be. But in many ways, we see the rise of nationalism in United States, in other countries, in Europe and things. How can we deal with those situations? Because I feel like your book is a book that are reflecting the actual climate, even here with immigration and immigration in Europe and other things. So how do you think we can, what path we may choose based on your work to achieve that ideal in which people feel like they belong where they were born and grew up in?
A lot of it is creating new stories. And I know that sounds almost okay, creating new stories. Okay, example. We have a story that we're born into. You and I were born into. The current state system is the way it is, the way it's always been, the way it always will be. No, there have been, if you study history, you know there's been other forms of governance for as long as we've existed on this planet, right? What is a form of government? It is a particular way of being based upon a story that a people at a particular time have, right? And that story could be the communist story. We need to take the wealth from the elites and allegedly spread it out. And that's going to inspire people, that particular story. Or we can have the story of, let's say, free market. The free market is amazing. Goods and services. Well, what about the people? If you're really into free market, then it should be the free market of goods, people, and services. But we forget the people aspect, right? Because our story, and you mentioned nationalism, the elites have concocted a story, and there are different elites through time that add to stories, change them for their own good, their own needs, right? But we, the people, whoever we happen to be at any given moment, we are fed this story, particularly through public education systems, right? Private schools also buy into this system, but perhaps not as strongly as the public school systems in countries do. And our particular narrative or story is, we are this, we are not that, whatever it may be, right? Point being, we as humans are story makers. We can create new stories, but it's almost as if there's this, we're defeated. Not everywhere around the globe at all. And oftentimes you will see the people who are the ones that are discriminated against, who are stateless, they're the ones who are actually, because they have nothing else to lose, they're the ones who are creating or challenging the present story and trying to create a new story. So it's all about, one, being open to the fact that the way things are not the way things have always been and not the way things will be in the future. So openness is key, right? Second part is, can I be humble enough to accept that I can be wrong in my beliefs, right? And that's a really hard human challenge, because I identify my thoughts on my beliefs with who I am. And God forbid somebody challenge my beliefs, because if my belief about something, my belief in a particular story is challenged, then somehow you're challenging me and my worth. Hence the anger, hence the nationalism, all this sort of stuff, right? But what if I can be open? And what if I can also say, shoot, I could be wrong about this particular story or narrative. Neither of these things are easy, Alpha. Neither of them are easy, right? Then you can go to that next step of, you called it dreaming. Nothing ever changes in the world unless we imagine something differently first. We have to dream. It's not always about producing. It is about what else, thinking on it, feeling in it, dreaming on it. Because unless you have those people that push another possibility into the space, things won't change, right? So it's multiple steps, and I want to say, is it education? Yes, of course, education is important here, but it's much more than education. It's a cultural change that has to happen, and you have to have enough people that want to actually change the story of belonging, for it to happen. And I think when you come from a privileged citizenship, a privileged state or country, you don't have that much interest in changing the story of the narrative, right?
Yes.
That's a challenge too.
Dr. Britton, I will, I will say thank you very much for first taking the time and writing about this topic, and bringing a light to people, bringing light on a category of the population that people often don't see, because as you indicated, people are blind about them, and having a vision, of wanting to to write a story about these people, and is the ongoing issue, and there are different ways of seeing the issue and different ways of thinking of a solution, and I just want to say thank you for sharing your time and sharing your thought on the issue. And my last question will be, what do you want people to take the final call? People may call it conclusion of the book and all that, your final call. And if people want to read about the book, how can they get the book?
My final call is dream into, think and feel into what it means to belong outside of the story you've been given, right? Mm-hmm. Recognize the facts that if you have a citizenship, unless you naturalized when you were older, you didn't get it through any merit of your own, right? Mm-hmm. And your citizenship determines your life opportunities. So just think about this concept we buy into as a story, being citizens of a state. Is it the best one we as humans can come up with? You may say it is. You may say it's not. But just consider that. In terms of where the book can be found, it's published through the University of Pennsylvania Press. There are several libraries that have it as well. I know I've seen it on Amazon. So there's different spaces that you can access the book.
I see. Yeah, I know also you are an artist. You are a rewild guide, so I will definitely keep in touch and engage on also invite you for other conversation related to your artwork and your rewilding as a rewilding guide teacher. For now, I just want to share my gratitude and say thank you very much for sharing your time on the Human Rights Tree. It was a pleasure talking to you and talking about your book, Statelessness in the Caribbean, The Paradox of Belonging in a Post-National World.
Thank you, Alpha.
Yes, pleasure. Thank you.